The Oak on Willow Glen. When we moved into our new house on Willow Glen Drive, we thought we were finally closing the chapter on a life of uncertainty. Years of packing duffel bags, sleeping in unfamiliar quarters, raising our son in base housing or cramped rentals had left us dreaming of one thing: stability. A permanent home, a place to plant roots, to breathe easy. That dream led us to a colonial-style house nestled near the edge of a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The kind of community that looked like a postcard. Front lawns trimmed with military precision, porches with swings creaking gently in the wind, children riding their bikes in tandem like a scene out of 1950s film reel. After so many years of movement, this place felt like the pause we needed. But what really sold the place wasn't the wraparound porch or the antique fixture set, was the oak tree. A towering, 100-year-old sentinel that stretched its arms across the entire backyard. My wife, Meredith, stood under it the day we first toured the house and whispered, "This is it." I watched her eyes shimmer with the kind of hope I hadn't seen since our early years. She pictured our son, Jacob, building forts in the branches, hosting summer campouts beneath its shade, growing up in the kind of world we never had time to give him. We signed the papers within days. Moving in felt like shedding a second skin. We were done with temporary. This was home. 3 days in, the doorbell rang. It was one of those slow, heavy rings that feels like a knock on your peace. Standing on the porch was a woman straight out of a corporate catalog. Platinum bob, wrinkle-free suit, manicured to perfection. She held a wicker basket and a smile so polished it should have come with a warning label. "Welcome to Willow Glen," she announced, thrusting the basket into my hands. "I'm Patricia Langley, president of the HOA." The basket had coupons and a laminated handbook of community guidelines. Patricia didn't make small talk. Her eyes darted over my shoulder, scanning the moving boxes on the porch. Jacob's skateboard leaning against the stair rail, a half-unpacked grill. Then her gaze drifted to the backyard. "Ah," she said, voice curdling with faux sweetness. "That oak." I followed her eyes to where the branches swayed in the breeze. "Yes," I replied, "it's beautiful." She tilted her head. "Some folks prefer a more uniform landscape. That tree is quite dominant. You might consider having it removed. It disrupts the symmetry." I blinked. "We're not removing it." There was a flicker behind her eyes. Something icy. Then the smile snapped back into place. "Well," she said, "we'll see how things go." That was the moment the ground shifted beneath us. The moment we realized that Patricia Langley wasn't just a neighbor. She was an occupying force. It started small. A fine for grass length $1.50. The lawn had been cut 2 days earlier. Another fine for leaving the garbage bin out 3 minutes past collection. Then Jacob's basketball hoop was deemed non-conforming because it was visible from the road, even though it was neatly tucked beside the garage. It felt less like rule enforcement and more like a message: you don't belong. Meredith, who had spent years in Army intelligence, went into mission mode. She pulled out a battered green notebook and began logging every infraction, every letter, every phone call. "Know your terrain. Know your enemy," she said, jotting down dates and times. Meanwhile, I tried to stay calm. I'd faced worse than an overzealous HOA president. I'd stood in deserts with bullets in the wind. But this was personal. This was someone trying to take our peace. Late one night, I noticed a dark SUV idling across the street. Headlights off, just sitting, watching. The next night, it came back. And the next. On the 4th night, Meredith had her binoculars out. "That's him," she said. "Walter Drake. Former cop. He's on the HOA board." Drake was Patricia's right hand. Her muscle. We'd later learn he was the reason 2 families had left within the last year, selling their homes under value and disappearing. Meredith installed cameras. Top grade, military surplus. Within a day, we had our perimeter covered. When Walter began creeping closer, standing by the mailbox, snapping photos of her backyard, Meredith simply noted the time and angle. "They're documenting us," she said, "but we're documenting them better." We learned Patricia's game. Apply pressure until people broke. Push them to leave. But why? The answer came from Richard Mendez, a soft-spoken neighbor with a Labrador and a quiet grudge. He told us over coffee that Patricia had been working with a development company, Westridge Holdings. They wanted to build luxury condos behind the neighborhood, but needed a zoning variance. The catch? A handful of protected trees, including our oak, and a few homeowners refusing to sell, stood in the way. We weren't eyesores. We were obstacles. And the oak? That was ground zero. One evening, two men came to the door in uniform. Sheriff badges. They said we were in violation of county codes and had to vacate within 48 hours. Meredith kept the chain latched and asked for IDs. They flashed them too fast. She smiled. "Please wait right there." She closed the door, walked to her office, and made a call to a deputy she knew from a base. 10 minutes later, real squad cars pulled into the driveway. The two-man imposters were arrested on the spot. Turns out, Walter Drake had hired them, paid in cash. Their confession, once written and notarized, became Exhibit A in what was quickly turning into a federal investigation. Meredith forwarded everything: security footage, timestamps, license plates, the whole operation to the Department of Justice. Impersonating law enforcement? That wasn't petty HOA business. That was prison time. The neighborhood began to stir. Whispers started. You stood up to them. What did you do? How can we help? We weren't alone anymore. Nancy Cartwright, the HOA treasurer, showed up one night with an envelope. Her hands trembled. Inside were records, unauthorized payments to Walter, fake invoices, doctored minutes. She wanted out. "I can't be part of this anymore," she whispered. Mark Givens, an investigative reporter, caught wind of the arrests and called us. He'd been tracking shady HOA dealings across the state and said our case connected several dots. "You're the missing piece," he told Meredith. It all led to a community meeting. Patricia called it an emergency vote to authorize legal action against us for defamation, rule violations, and disruption of neighborhood harmony. We saw it for what it was: a last, desperate attempt to cast us as villains. But we came prepared. Meredith stood in that meeting, armed with documents, affidavits, financial reports, security footage, and legal backing from her contacts. Walter's payment trail? Exposed. The fake eviction? Publicized. The tree? Officially certified as a protected heritage oak by the State Forestry Division. And just when Patricia tried to spin her way out accusing us of harassment, of fabricating evidence, Deputy Rachel Ortiz from the sheriff's office stood and confirmed the active investigation. Mark Givens, from the back row, announced his article would run on the front page the next morning: "Suburb Scandal: When Power Corrupts the Cul-de-sac." Then came the vote. Daniel Shin, a retired law professor from across the street, stood and cited the bylaws. Emergency removal could be initiated with 60% approval in cases of gross misconduct. Within seconds, hands shot into the air. It was unanimous. Patricia Langley was removed as HOA president. Walter Drake was already facing charges. Plea deal pending. The developer Westridge Holdings had their zoning appeal frozen. Investigations followed. And the oak? It still stands. 3 months later, we hosted a block party under its sprawling limbs. Jacob and his new friends hung lanterns from the branches and painted signs for a tree club they'd started. Meredith grilled burgers. I sipped a beer and looked around at a neighborhood finally at peace. People laughed without glancing over their shoulders. Kids played without restriction. Neighbors spoke not in whispers, but with pride. We had turned a battlefield into a sanctuary. And that oak tree? It was no longer just wood and leaves. It was proof that roots matter, that some things are worth standing your ground for. When the sun dipped behind the rooftops that night and laughter echoed beneath the stars, Meredith leaned against me and whispered, "They picked the wrong family." And I smiled, because she was right. We were home. Finally. And this time, we weren't going anywhere.